Hi, welcome back. I'm Mary and this is Fisticakes. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made the details for this quinceanera cake. Now I say details because I'm not showing you how I'm filling and stacking the tiers, but more about the details themselves. If you are new to my channel, I will attach some links to other videos that show you more how I handle the filling and the stacking of the tiers. A lot of the details on this cake involved silicone molds. For these molds, I used fondant, and I actually brushed some cornstarch inside of the mold so that once I go to release these, when they have firmed up a little bit, then they won't stick. So I'm making a plaque that has some filigree-esque details around the plaque on the top tier. And I'm using this mold to create the filigree part itself. I did end up cutting off some extra pieces and modified it to fit the design that I was going for. I like to use these Dresden tools to kind of pinch and push in the fondant into these very detailed little molds. It can be really hard to get a good release or a good impression of the pattern if you don't use those tools. These tools are awesome. I use them for a lot. And once I've pushed the fondant in there, I kind of use the roller to make sure that all the nooks and crannies are filled in and use a palette knife, a painting palette knife, to cut off the excess. You could use just a regular knife, a sharp knife. Just make sure that you don't cut the mold itself. Now this is for the background of the plaque. I just cut a circle and then I use the roller to elongate it to make it look more of an oval. I played around with this plaque for quite a while till I got it to look the way I wanted it. The good thing about fondant is that it is pliable and moldable, and you can adjust it for your needs. And I felt that these end pieces, these little, what would you call it, little corners, just stood out too far from the plaque. And I wanted it more kind of catty corner of the design. So I did cut off quite a bit just to make it more what I had in my mind's eye. X-Acto knives are the perfect tool for this. I just used straight up water with a brush to attach the fondant pieces to the fondant backing. And like I said, I messed with this for quite a while till I got it where I wanted it, and here's the end result. Now for the leaf patterns around the bottom of the cake. They're actually leaves. I don't know if you can tell that by looking at it, but it is a leaf pattern that I shaped to make them have a form to them. Just go ahead and you can put those in the refrigerator to get them to firm up before you release them, if that makes it easier, especially the really detailed molds like the filigree one works great for that. And I just used those straws to dry the leaves on to hold that shape while they dried. Those dried overnight. I did these details the day before I put the cake together. And for the gold that I'm brushing on here, I just used gold luster dust. I will try to remember to attach a link for that. I get asked that a lot. Where do I get my gold luster dust or my gold highlighter? I'll try to remember to do that. But I mixed it with vodka. You can use Everclear, whichever one you prefer. Actually, here I used Everclear because I was at work, and that's what we have there. And just brushed it on to give it the gold, the shiny gold metallic look. And I'm airbrushing with the same gold. I just thin it out a little bit more so that it doesn't get stuck in your airbrush for these leaves. It takes quite a few coats to get a really good all over color. See how pretty those are. And the base color I used was just, I think it was Americolor Gold with the fondant itself. Now I'm just going to cover the board. It's actually a cake drum with some ivory fondant so that it's more of a uniform look from top to the bottom. The background color for the whole thing was ivory. And you didn't see me do it, but I actually put some shortening on the cake drum before I put the fondant on it so that it sticks to it a little bit. But you do have a little wiggle room to roll out the fondant if it's not quite big enough when you first put it on. And that happened to me this time. I just manipulated it and stretched it out where I needed it to be. Popped the bubbles with the pins, and now I am just cutting off the excess with a sharp knife. We always cover the edges of our boards with ribbon, and I just use double-sided tape to get it to stick. And I wrapped it all the way around in sections, the double-sided tape, and now I'm just sticking the ribbon to it. I like to have my hand on the bottom so that I can feel that the ribbon's not hanging down too far. And when you have two cake drums glued together like we did for this one, you kind of see a shadow in between the two boards. So I went ahead and I did another row of the ribbon so that you didn't see that little line in between them. The stencil for this cake I thought was gorgeous. My boss got the stencil. I'll have to ask her where she got it, and I'll try to attach a link unless I find it on my own. To do the stenciling, I'm using buttercream. On buttercream. I just find that buttercream for me works better than royal icing on the buttercream because the butter in the buttercream can kind of melt the royal icing. So I make sure that it's nice and firm, nice and chilled. Use the pins to hold the stencil in place, and make sure that those sides are flush on the cake itself so that you're not pushing your buttercream into gaps, because that will make your job a lot harder. Trust me, just get them as straight as you can. And I think the key to getting a good result with these small patterns is to put a thin coat of the buttercream on the stencil and remove the excess after it's kind of set up a little bit. Since your cake would be chilled, it's going to chill the buttercream quick, and you can kind of scrape it off a little bit. But there's a fine line between pushing too hard and pushing enough. You don't want to push that buttercream underneath the stencil, but it can be done. It just takes practice, just like anything else. And I want to remove as much of that extra buttercream as possible, because when you pull that stencil off of a cake, when it's buttercream on buttercream, if there's buttercream on the outside edge of that stencil, you can sometimes pull it right off the cake too. And I use that saran wrap on the top behind the stencil, and then some parchment paper around the side, so when I'm airbrushing like I'm doing here, the overspray doesn't get on the cake. And there were fine little details in between each of these diamond patterns, little tiny diamond patterns, kind of at an angle, diagonally. So I made sure I went and got those first, and then went back and sprayed over the rest. You don't want to do a real heavy coat of that gold airbrush either, because it could drip. And then gently remove your stencil. Just line these up as good as you can. You might have a gap here or there, but that's okay. Nobody's going to notice that but you. And there's always a back to a cake, right? Always a back to a cake. And I just attached that plaque with a little bit of buttercream. And my boss went in later and she painted the 15 on it. She has a more steady hand than I do, so she does those things. And I'm attaching these leaf details around the bottom. There's a name for that, but I do not know what it is. If I find it, I will put it in the text. I just attached those with buttercream as well. And I would start those in the back of the cake, so that if you come around, work your way around to the front, around the cake, and you get back to where you started, if it doesn't line up exactly, and you have some overlap or a little bit of a gap, it's going to be in the back of the cake. And you inevitably rub off some of the paint, some of the airbrush, so just go back in and touch it up where you need to. I made a rope detail to put in between each tier to hide any gap that might be between each tier, because it happens sometimes. And I'm using my clay extruder with an attachment that, if you did a cross section on it, it would be the shape. I don't even know the name of the shape. It would have 3 little bumps around it in a circle. And when you put the fondant inside there, make sure you add quite a bit of shortening to it to soften it up real good, and put some of your cornstarch inside it also, inside the extruder, so that it works out, it comes out easier. And when you just twist this rope, since you have those indentations around it, when you twist it, it makes a rope pattern. Makes your job so much easier. And just hold one end down, or you can roll them in opposite directions. Just like I did right there. Just kind of roll them in your hands in opposite directions. And just set it aside to let it firm up a little bit so they're easier to attach to the cake when it's time. I would not ever recommend cutting out a shape or making a trim like this and immediately putting it on the cake, because it's going to be too soft. You need it to set up just a little bit, but don't wait too long or it could crack also. So I would give it maybe 10 minutes. I just went ahead and piped a bead of buttercream in between each tier so that the border would have something to stick to. And since it's had time to firm up, it didn't break, it didn't stretch out, nothing like that. And I did the same in between these two tiers. So the gold accents were throughout the entire cake. We did go back and paint the stenciled section just a little bit more because we wanted it more a brighter gold. But it's a small pattern, so you're not seeing a lot of the gold. And I used that same gold paint, edible gold paint, on the rope. It's hard to get a good angle for me because the camera has to be where my hand is. I'm a one-woman show when it comes to these videos, so sometimes my angles leave a little to be desired, and I know that, but I don't have somebody following me around filming me from 3 different angles. So you have to bear with me, and you know what I'm doing. And you can kind of see it more from this angle. And this dries very quickly. Once the paint dries, the alcohol that you use to make the paint evaporates, so you're just left with the gold. And there it is, all done. I thought this cake was beautiful, and I had a wonderful time doing it and showing it to you. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Please like, share, do all the things. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.